Okay, and then now we can share. Okay, so just as a recap, we started talking about depressive disorders specifically under our mood disorder section. So let's just go through it really quick. Okay, so here we are Wednesday. I think we will definitely cover suicide. Not sure if we'll get to the bipolar section yet, but definitely by Friday we'll be talking about the bipolar and related disorders. Okay, so we covered all this. So these were just all the diagnostic criteria for the different disorders we covered. Uh, we talked about prevalence, and then I think we ended here on prevalence. So we'll cover theories of depression. We'll talk a little bit about evidence-based treatment and see how far we get. There's like quite a few videos. So yeah, let's just see how far we get with theory and intervention. So I think this is a lot more in depth, I think, in terms of the intervention part than what your book covers. So the theories do come from the book. Obviously, I added some other things, but I included some of my own things for the intervention stuff, specifically working with kids and some videos that might be helpful. So that's what I've included. I just think it's interesting from a clinical perspective, like what does it actually mean to treat a kid with depression, or like what's the evidence-based intervention we're using, and then what are the specific techniques that you use when you're working clinically with kids or adults. So I've included a lot of like worksheets that I've used in the past. Okay, so let's talk about different theories of depression. So before we get there, as always, and I say this with every single mental health disorder that we cover, there's always going to be some sort of biological component, cognitive component, and some sort of environmental component, which includes the social environment, family environment, things like that. So we're always accounting for all of these different things. And when you think back to, oh, hold on, I heard someone join. I couldn't let them in. Sorry. Okay. I've said this with every disorder, but what I was going to say is with the models that we covered, I don't know, like in week 2, week 3, we talked about diathesis stress model, we talked about interactional models. So all those things, keep them in your mind. There's not one particular gene that explains a specific disorder. There might be genes that are implicated more than other genes, but again, it's not a one-to-one ratio. It's not like, I don't know, like if you have bronchitis, the causes of bronchitis are X, Y, and Z. It's not as simple as that. So all of these disorders, be thinking about what is the interaction between all of these different variables that might manifest as the symptom of depression, or symptom of anxiety, things like that. So we'll start with biological influences, and this is in the text. So there are, again, numerous genes involved. And again, we talked about that in that earlier chapter. So most disorders are polygenic, multiple genes involved. It's not one specific gene that automatically causes a disorder. Um, so the one that is most implicated, though, in depression is the 5-HTT-LPR transporter gene. So that's just a helpful thing to remember if we are going to see any studies out there. A lot of them, genetic studies at least, will implicate this particular transporter gene. So this one seems to be heavily implicated in depression. We see a lot of neurochemical and neuroendocrine influences, so things like serotonin, norepinephrine, cortisol, things like that. If you're looking at different studies of like stress response, or like are there anatomical differences in anatomical brain differences? Are there differences in the neurotransmitters that get secreted? These are the ones that you typically see talked about in different studies. So having like an absence of serotonin, things like that. The other thing that I think is important and will come up, or has come up already in, I think it was like chapter 3, temperament. So we think of temperament as also a biological predisposition. So temperament is different than personality. Your temperament is just kind of what you're born with. Does anyone remember what we talked about temperament in the context of babies because it's a early predisposition. Does anyone remember like what the different, there were like three specific types of temperament that we usually talked about to describe babies. Oops, sorry. I don't know if anyone remembers. And I'm not monitoring the chat, so I can't see. Okay. I can't see anything in the chat if there's anything. So the three that we talked about in terms of temperament with babies were easy, uh, slow to warm up, and then difficult. So those were just kind of the three characteristics that we talked about with babies, and we talked about goodness of fit when it comes to the parenting style of that particular baby's parent. So those are things that we had talked about previously with temperament. Excuse me. It also matters here, and it's going to come across in multiple different disorders. So when we're taking an inventory, so let's say a family comes in and they're seeking therapy, and I'm going to go in and just do an intake. So tell me what's been going on. Why are you here today? Um, one of the forms that they'll likely fill out or that I'll ask for in this interview is, tell me about like your child, tell me about your child, so the child as a baby. So did they seem difficult to soothe? Were they colicky? Were there any issues with separating for the most part that felt different than what's normative for a little kid being separated from their parent? So we ask things like that because we do consider that this is a temperamental risk factor. So a lot of times in the clinic that I've worked in, from an assessment standpoint, where we did like actually it was like a 2-day assessment battery to assess specific concerns that these parents had. In our paperwork, we did have a section that asked specifically about temperament. And we didn't call it easy, slow to warm up, or difficult, but we asked the questions that touched on temperament. So we asked, was your child difficult to soothe? Were they comforted by your affection? Were they affectionate? How did they separate from you? So the reason we're asking those questions is because temperament can play a role, and can contribute with other risk factors to then develop as a mental health problem. So think of that when we think about the three types of temperaments that a baby might exhibit. The other aspects of temperament are specific traits, so negative affectivity and positive affectivity, um, that might also explain some of the differences in what you're seeing. So a baby that might be, I don't know, difficult or slow to warm up might have higher levels of negative affectivity. Your book also calls it emotionality, so negative emotionality and positive emotionality. Um, it's just the constellation of traits. It's like having higher, it's like when you talk about like a sunny person, the sunny disposition, that's relating more to having higher positive affectivity. Just naturally, they're a little bit more sunny. Same thing with negative. Naturally, they're a little bit lower, maybe um, be more prone to some sensitivity, maybe crying more as a baby, things like that. So we think of how does your temperament also play a role in your mental health problems that you're expressing. Those are generally the biological influences. And then we think a lot about the cognitive influences. And this is combined with cognitive behavioral and some of the interpersonal factors when we get to interventions and how theory informs intervention. So cognitive aspects we care about a lot. Um, First thing that we need to know, and this is not specific to depression, but our cognitions, so how we think, those things influence our behaviors and our emotions, and it's how we navigate the world. So our beliefs about what other people do, the reason why we do things, why we reacted to things, why I have this feeling or emotion, why I acted a certain way. All of that is impacted by your thoughts. And everything is related to one another. So, how I think about something is going to affect how I feel, and those things might affect what I actually do. And vice versa, right? What I do might impact how I feel and the thoughts that I have about myself. It might also impact other people and how they're going to interact with me. So again, it's all interactional. Excuse me. God, sorry. Still sick. So our cognitions are really important, and this is something that then becomes targeted in an intervention context. So in general, remember that our thoughts shape our behavior and our emotions. It's how we interact with the world, it's how the world interacts with us, and how we perceive that. The problem happens when we have thinking errors. So thinking errors is a word I might use with a little kid, but really we call them cognitive distortions. And these cognitive distortions are the things that then make it more likely that you may experience depression or anxiety or any of the other mental health problems. So cognitive distortions are not just specific to people with mental health problems. A lot of us experience these cognitive distortions. These are things that maybe are exaggerated beliefs that we might have, or thoughts that we might have that are catastrophizing, that we really don't have evidence for. So maybe we're really thinking ahead in the future and we're really, really worrying about something that we actually don't have any evidence for happening in the past, and the likelihood is pretty low in the future. We might be doing the opposite in time, so ruminating, so really hanging on to something in the past. And that's not to say that's not something that other people don't experience, but remember, with any disorder, we're thinking about the proportion. Like, is it out of proportion for what the situation is? So I have an example on the next few slides, but it's really when these cognitive distortions are a little bit stronger in magnitude and are pretty prevalent most of the time. These are the things that we kind of worry about and then are targeted in an intervention context. So we have generally beliefs that just shape our world. We have thoughts, and all these thoughts are, there's nothing wrong with having thoughts, right? We think of it as everyone has different types of thoughts. Some are like unusual or like it doesn't really matter what the thought is. It's when we have these distortions in our thinking that then might lead to depression, or might make us more vulnerable to different situations that then lead to depression. So having broad beliefs, again, that don't really have any evidence, or maybe there's a small amount of evidence, but we've kind of blown it out of proportion. Those are things that are going to make us feel pretty crappy, and might change how we interact with the world, and then that kind of makes it so that the world interacts with us in that way too. So some general beliefs like, excuse me, I don't have any friends. Um, Forgot to call my mom on her birthday, so I'm a failure of a daughter. Everyone should like me. Those are just some examples of thoughts that probably have occurred for a lot of people. And when these thoughts stick and they really snowball and they really impact your thoughts about yourself, um, how you interact with the world, and then your feelings, that's when we kind of snowball into things like depression, anxiety. So it's really these thoughts that we target using cognitive restructuring in a particular type of intervention, which we'll cover in a bit. So those are like some of the cognitive things that we keep in our mind. So if we, if we have a lot of cognitive distortions, our temperament, or we have any other like biological risk factors, which we're just not really going to know, other than like if you have a family history, like maybe mom has depression, you're not really going to know about your genes, which is why the model isn't so helpful from a clinical perspective. So just be thinking, if you have some of those risk factors, you are experiencing a lot of cognitive distortions. Um, those are two things that might interact with one another. The other thing is that there's the learned helplessness theory, and I think it's helpful for us to think about how it impacts our thoughts. So, in learned helplessness theory, this is Martin Seligman's theory. He's a big guy in positive psychology, which is super interesting. So, he did a study. I think it's been done with like rats or mice, and then there's also done with dogs. And basically, that through his experiment, he learned that depression is learned. So think of like a behavioral experiment. Over time, we kind of learn information. That's what behaviorists believe about behavior. Um, and so from this study, he extrapolated it to adults or to people, and he basically says that depression is learned. And what we mean by that is individuals perceive themselves as having little control of their environment in certain situations where they've experienced failure. And then when they start to perceive themselves as ineffective, having pretty little control, and just kind of like at the mercy of all these things in life and the failures, that's when learned helplessness arises, which in turn leads to depressive symptoms. So we're going to watch this, like it's a 1 minute video, but this gives you context for the dog experiment. So like there was a shocky board and they're supposed to step over the board, but they were getting shocked when they weren't stepping further out enough. And so over time, some dogs learned that, oh, I should just hang back even when like the thing wasn't shocking them. And some other dogs are more resilient and recognize that, oh, if I step over it, I won't get shocked. So that idea of the first group kind of hanging back and kind of feel like not sulking, but falling back and basically not being able to be agentic over their actions or their life by not stepping over it. That was the analogy used for individuals with depression, just over time, like repeated, like whether it's failure, repeated negative outcomes with a person that you're, or school or anything like that, that then leads to learned helplessness. And then having that helpless feeling can contribute to having depression or is a symptom of depression in and of itself. The other thing why I think this is important for the cognitive stuff that we're talking about is that when an event occurs, we form conclusions about why it happened. So these are causal attributions we make, and the specific explanatory style that we use or the attribution style that we have, this is the thing that kind of underlies those cognitive distortions, if they are distortions. So generally, there's most models saying that depressed individuals tend to have internal, stable, and global explanatory styles. And I think I have a slide on the next, or a picture on the next slide, so we can look at what that means. But before we do that, I want to watch this like video. It's kind of like choppy, but no, wait, it's just a reel. So we'll watch it for 1 second. And I don't know how to make it bigger, so sorry, just bear with me. Oh, okay.
Learned helplessness is a theory developed by Martin Seligman in the late 1960s. It's all about how we might learn to feel powerless and stop trying to change a situation. Seligman was experimenting with dogs, trying to understand conditioning. He had the dogs in harnesses and gave them mild electric shocks. Some of the dogs could stop the shock by pressing a lever, while others couldn't do a thing about it. The interesting part is when they put the dogs in a new situation where they could easily jump over a low barrier to escape the shock. The dogs that had control earlier figured it out quickly, but the dogs that couldn't do anything before just lay down and took the shock. It's like they learned they were helpless and gave up. Seligman saw that this wasn't just about dogs, it applied to humans as well. Learned helplessness is a theory developed.
So that's just a really quick like summary of it. I also don't think the animation is really all that helpful. It makes it look like they were running loose. It was like a more controlled environment where there were like levers and like little shocky things on there that the dogs had to like manage walking over. And then same thing with the rat, I think it was a rat experiment where they were in a controlled like environment and there were little shocky things in there. So again, it's an animal study, but it's used as an analogy for individuals, so humans, and it makes sense why. But there are also other theories out there, but this is one of the more prominent theories, learned helplessness. And it's also why this person, Martin Seligman, is in positive psychology because he talks a lot about like gratitude and like savoring, like all the aspects of positive psychology, which are intended to boost positive emotion rather than focusing on like disordered stuff. So it's just a different area of psychology, but it's interesting that from this kind of work, his line of work kind of, I guess, pivoted to more positive psych about gratitude and mindfulness. Okay, so remember we just talked about internal, stable, global. Okay, so these are some images I pulled, but I think they're helpful for looking at what does that mean. So if we think of this internal, stable, global attribution style or explanatory style, if we're looking at the top right, remember that this is explaining the type of thoughts that we have. And it tends to be that individuals with depression perhaps have more of this type of explanatory style. So on the left-hand side, let's say we had a negative event happen. The event here is going to be break up with a romantic partner. These are some of the assumptions that this person, potentially with depression, may have, or um, thoughts that they have about it. So assumptions and thoughts that they think about it. So they had a breakup. One comment or thought might come up is, I'll never get over this, right? So I'll never get over this is a stable statement. It's about the stability of this pain, of this of this pain that they're experiencing. So stable meaning it's ongoing. That's different from temporary, which is maybe perhaps a more effective way of thinking about it, where instead we're saying, yeah, this sucks, and it's only going to be it's only going to be like this for a little bit. It's not going to be the rest of my life to the day I die. So that's the difference between stable and temporary. As far as global, so again, remember, it's in a breakup context. This person might think, without my partner, I can't seem to do anything right. And that's different from a more specific explanatory attribution style, where we might say instead, I miss my partner, but thankfully I have family and other friends. So this global idea is kind of like it's all encompassing, like, excuse me, everything's over. My entire life, I can't do anything right. Like, just it's a larger problem than what it is. The specific is saying, like, yeah, there's a part of me, of course, that's going to miss my partner. Like, this is a bad breakup. And I also have some of these other things. Like, this is a specific aspect or specific problem in my life. And there's some other aspects when I think globally of my life that I can take comfort in. The last one, sorry, is internal versus external. So internal is I'm internalizing a lot of things. Things are my fault. I'm a bad person. So here the example is our breakup was all my fault. That might be different than an external, right? Taking it, not personalizing it, kind of taking it outside of the person and instead saying, it takes two to make a relationship and maybe it just wasn't meant to be. So just an example of how, in this situation, that's what stable, global, and internal attributions might look like. And remembering that this is only one situation. So it's not necessarily that you have this one situation and then you have depression. You might, but in terms of a disorder, really think about this just compounding over time. It can be any event. It could be, I got an F on my test and I'm a college student. Okay, I will never, ever, 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 ever get into another. If I want to go to grad school, I'll never get into grad school. I might internalize it by saying, I'm stupid. I don't even know why I tried to think about grad school. It's all me. I'm dumb. I don't even know why I think about that. Global is like, and my life is over. Like there's nothing else going for me. I have no other attributes that are good. It's just this is just another example of how I'm a failure. That's another thing that is pretty harsh, but is, something that if you have those thoughts compounded over time with multiple different interactions that you have with people, different events that happen that are not desirable, this is going to compound over time. And easily you could see how this might contribute to depression. Something that we might do in the therapy context then is, we are not necessarily going to call it stable, global, internal. What that doesn't really matter. What matters is some of the content of what's happening here. So saying something like, I'll never get over this, we don't actually know that, right? We don't actually have any evidence that we can't tell the future. So here, the cognitive distortion that's happening is fortune telling. We don't actually know that we're never going to get over this. I think we can strongly suspect that it's going to be painful for a little bit, and it might take a year, might take a year and a half. And that's not to say that that's going to be fun. And we can't say actually with certainty that you're never, ever, ever, ever going to get over this. And so something we might do to challenge that is just, have there been other situations? Okay. So like, let's say we're talking about a breakup right now, and in the past they've gotten a bad grade and they had this exact same thing where I'm never going to get a good grade again, or I'm like never going to, I don't know, I'm a freshman and I'm never going to make it to sophomore year. I'm just going to have to keep retaking my freshman year because I suck. I got a bad grade. we can use that as evidence for, okay, well, surely you've gotten a passing grade. Now you're a sophomore. Well, yeah. Okay, so things don't necessarily last forever, even when it feels like that. So that might be something, not to be confrontational, but just when they're ready, just to provide some additional evidence of, yeah, the feeling makes a lot of sense. Like that's totally valid. And, we actually don't know that, and that might take some of the pain away from that. So that's the global stability too. Same thing. What is this one? Without my partner, and then I'll never get over this. I'm looking down here on the blue table. I'll never be fit enough to run a marathon. Again, we don't know that for sure. There have probably been things that you've doubted about yourself in the past that maybe you like, I can't think of the word. You like you passed your expectations, right? We actually don't know that. And then something that's a little bit more internal, it's my fault, right? So in the situation with the breakup, our breakup was all my fault. In the situation in the blue table, it's my fault I'm injured. I feel, excuse me, it's my fault I'm injured. I should give up my sport. That one's a little bit more, tends to be more tied to like self-esteem and might be related to how someone grew up. But that one is a little bit harder to work with, but is really meaningful because these are attributes that they may be saying about themselves. So underneath saying our breakup was all my fault, there might be some sort of like schema that they have about themselves. It might be, I'm a bad person, I'm shameful, I'm this, and this, right? So first needing to identify like what is it underneath all of that. Um, and are you actually a bad person if that's the thing that's lying underneath the it's all my fault um, internal style of thinking? The table also on the has new attributions, so changing it to external, unstable, and local. Um, Again, this is just in the context of the explanatory style. This is not necessarily how I would do it in a therapy context. Typically, we identify specific distortions rather than saying what the style of attribution is, but it could be helpful. Okay, so that's how theory, or that's what the theories are. And I've already given an example of how theory can inform intervention. So if we have cognitive distortions in the way that we're thinking, one evidence-based way in a CBT, cognitive behavioral framework, is to use cognitive restructuring. So that's kind of a clear link between theory to intervention. But let's watch this quick video on what are the effective types of therapy for youth with depression.
So the gold standard evidence-based type of psychotherapy for youth depression is a type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. So CBT focuses on the connections between our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So it's the idea that the way we think about a situation strongly influences the way we feel about it. And then the way we feel about it has a strong influence on the way that we behave. So here's an example from youth depression. Say that I am a child or a teenager and I have this repeated thought that no one likes me. Having that thought over and over is going to make me feel sad, lonely, maybe even angry. Why should I need to make people like me? And then because I'm having that thought and I'm feeling that way, maybe I start to socially isolate. So my thought is like, well, if no one likes me and I'm feeling really lonely and sad and frustrated, maybe I'll just stay at home and I won't text anybody or try to hang out. And then because I'm now isolated, this reinforces my original belief that no one likes me because I don't have opportunities to see that actually it's not so bad. Maybe not everyone likes me, but plenty of kids like me. So in CBT, we're really focusing on understanding these thought, feeling, and behavior patterns, and then teaching children and teens that you can change the way that you think, and you can also change the way you behave to change the way that you feel. So some of the strategies that we might treat children and teens from a CBT perspective include things like behavioral activation. So this is a really well-tested and evidence-based intervention to get kids moving again. So when we're depressed, we tend to isolate, we tend to move less because we're feeling tired and sad and we just want to be alone. But this actually means that kids and teens miss out on really valuable opportunities to feel connected, to kind of get moving, to get outside, and to see that actually there are lots of opportunities to feel a little bit better, even if it's just coming in smaller spurts. We also teach kids and teens in CBT about identifying their automatic negative thought patterns. So when they're in a situation, are they more likely to accidentally either interpret something as being overly negative or more negative than it actually is? And then again, that flows into how they feel and how they behave in that situation. Or are they actually just kind of feeling blue a lot of the time? And so everything feels kind of blah. So can we identify the automatic negative thoughts that we're having? Can we reframe them? Can we try to approach situations in a more balanced, sometimes more realistic, and hopefully even a little bit more positive of a way? And then the third set of interventions that we often use in CBT have to do with relaxation. So how can we teach children and teens to notice when I'm feeling depressed, when I'm feeling blue, I'm having a lot of physical tension in my body. So what can I do to increase my own physiological self-soothing so that I feel more in control of how my body feels? And if my body is more relaxed, my mind is more relaxed, and that helps with mood. For our teens with more severe depression symptoms, there's another type of psychotherapy that has been found to be very helpful called dialectical behavior therapy, commonly referred to as DBT. So DBT is actually a form of CBT that was specifically designed for our youth who experience really intense emotions. And then often from those intense emotions, they experience more emotional or behavioral dysregulation, and then also risky or self-injurious behaviors or even suicidality. And DBT has been found to be very effective at helping teens understand their emotions better, respond to them in a healthier way, and cope with them. So in DBT, we're teaching children and teens how to more effectively move through their daily lives. So often when kids come to DBT, they're experiencing really intense emotions, and that's making things feel really, really hard, whether that's in going to school, being with their friends or family, or doing activities that they really enjoy. And as I mentioned before, these children and teens are often experiencing more severe symptoms of depression. So they may be engaging in self-injurious behavior, thinking about or even attempting suicide.
Okay, and I'm going to do IPT really quick.
A third kind of psychotherapy that can be helpful for youth with depression is called interpersonal psychotherapy, or IPT. So in IPT, you're really focusing on a person's relationships and how a person's relationships connect to their mood. So thinking together, for example, with an adolescent around what's happening with your relationships. Are they satisfying? Do they feel healthy? Do they feel reciprocal? Right? Where are the kind of gaps in your relationships with important people? And then let's think together on a plan for strengthening those relationships, improving your communication with important people in your life, and then tracking as you're improving your relationships, are you also seeing improvement in your mood and your ability to go out and do the things that you need to do during the week?
I forgot that it covers a little bit about DBT. Excuse me. We'll talk more about DBT when we talk about emerging personality disorder, which is how DBT was actually what DBT was first developed for, which was personality disorder and just more severe emotion dysregulation. But yes, you can use principles of DBT for someone with depression. Usually DBT is done though with more severe emotional behaviors, which is what she did say. But in DBT, we're often tracking a lot of pretty intense dysregulations, so things like self-harm, suicide attempts, pretty strong suicidal ideation, like emotional instability, so things like that. And again, we'll cover more in a few weeks, but the two that I really wanted you to listen to was CBT and IPT. So for children and adolescents, there are two evidence-based interventions for depression, not necessarily emotion regulation, in which case we might include DBT, but for depression specifically, we have CBT and IPT. So CBT is cognitive behavior therapy. I think she did a good job of explaining what are the aspects of CBT that we kind of cover in an intervention with a child. And I think you perhaps can see the overlap with the cognitive distortions that we've already talked about. And she also talked about relaxation. So that's really kind of tying together the whole like triangle, how it's all related, how your feelings, your thoughts, and what you actually do are all related to one another. And we can help ease some of our emotions, maybe might kind of cool down some of the thoughts if we also engage in some of these relaxation techniques. And for kids or anybody who's also very depressed and maybe they're not doing anything, so things like not showering, not getting up, like staying home, like not doing anything, not interacting with anyone, one of the first things we'll do is behavioral activation, is just get out, get up, go do something, go on a walk, go check your mail, like anything like that. So that's one of the first things we'll start with if someone is kind of on that starting point of having depression. IPT, we have a few slides on that, but IPT is actually meant for adolescents, and it's rooted in, like, the model is pretty cool. It's rooted in attachment theory, it's rooted in family systems and the medical model as well. And it really taps into the interpersonal aspects of depression. And it still counts for the cognitive aspects and what you think and how you feel towards people. But it, instead of focusing on the individual, like the thoughts, feelings, emotions within this individual, IPT really focuses on the system in which the child is in and pinpoints a particular type of interpersonal interaction that maybe isn't going so well and is contributing to the depression. So the models are different. And so through that, the intervention target looks a little bit different between the two. So CBT, this is just stuff that she has already talked about in the video. So there's this whole cycle, and this is the word reinforcement that she used in the video. The idea being that we have this cognitive triangle, and this is one of the first things you'll teach if you're a therapist and you're teaching someone about CBT and you're introducing, this is the kind of stuff we're going to start with. You want to give psychoeducation about what is the CBT triangle. And the CBT triangle is the thing on the right. So it's this idea that all these things are related. Our behaviors, how we feel, and how we think are all related to one another. And it moves in any direction of this triangle. And a lot of times when we're depressed, if you look down here to the red circle, it's very reinforcing in the sense that our behavior is reinforced, our thoughts are reinforced. And remember, reinforcement doesn't necessarily mean a positive thing. It just means that it's maintaining the behavior. So in a cycle of depression, we experience, let's say we're not engaging in pleasant activities. So that's the behavior aspect of the CBT triangle. We're physically not getting out there. We're physically, let's say people were inviting us to go out and hang out, and I'm just declining all of them, or I'm not even responding. I'm ignoring. I'm just like too down to even look at my phone. I like haven't looked at my phone in 3 days. Let's say that then turns into us missing some of those opportunities. Maybe people don't reach out anymore. Maybe you just missed it, that you didn't answer it, so you didn't go. So in general, we're not engaging in pleasant activities. If you're not engaging in pleasant activities, well, of course, you're experiencing less pleasure. Nothing, it doesn't feel good. You're just kind of at home, kind of continuing the feelings that you have. Nothing is really changing in the environment. So yeah, it's going to impact how we feel. We're going to experience less pleasure. Sitting at home, feeling less pleasure, perhaps even having thoughts of, okay, we'll see, no one likes me. That's why I'm home anyways. Like, I was really upset about this one thing, or I just feel really depressed, and I've, just been thinking about no one likes me, all these friends are fake, like no one really cares about me. Not having these experiences with other people, which we see on the behavior side, might actually reinforce those thoughts. Okay, we'll see. No one invited me. I haven't been going out in 2 weeks at this point. No one's been reaching out. That could be true. All those things are going to increase your depressed mood. And then I feel worse. So now, of course, I don't want to go out. Of course, I don't want to go shower. Of course, I don't want to do these things. So it's this really cyclical cycle, which gets really tough. And so this is something that we really try to intervene at different points. So with the cognitive restructuring or the reframing, if we're catching thoughts, basically we're on the thought side of the triangle. We're really trying to intervene there and help shed some light on, is something happening here? Like, are we thinking kind of like, are we making an assumption here? Like, do we actually know that? The feeling side is, can we engage in activities that are going to increase our mood? So can you do things that are a little bit more positive for you? So can you experience more pleasure? On the other side of the feelings, if it's like really negative feelings, like maybe anxiety is strong, the mood aspect is really, really low, we're also going to implement some relaxation techniques. So deep breathing, like, do you know where in your body you feel this sadness? And they might say, like, I feel a pit in my stomach. Okay, so now we know where in your body you feel this. Could we do progressive muscle relaxation? So we're kind of armoring them with a lot of relaxation strategies to help with the feeling side as well. And then behaviors. So like, that's straight up behavior activation. Go do something. And depending on the severity of the person's depression and what their lifestyle is, what the context is, that can be really different. So someone with more, I don't want to say recent, but maybe less severe depression. Maybe it's like, I am generally an active person. I'm pretty social. And in the last month, I just kind of really withdrew. For them, we might say, okay, it might be a more social thing, like go to the grocery store. Can you go to HEB? Can you go do this? Can you go on a drive? Like that might be where we start. Whereas someone with more severe depression, maybe who hasn't showered in 2 weeks, I was working with someone who didn't brush her hair, sorry, not brush her, didn't brush her teeth, couldn't shower, couldn't wash her hands, even though she would go to the bathroom. And so one of the first things we did was like, can you like get in the shower? Can you just like jump in the shower? Like, you don't necessarily have to wash yourself yet with soap, but can you like get up, like get off the couch, go do this? So we might start there with more like life skills. There's a term with autism that I'm thinking, independent living skills. We might start there. Go brush your teeth, go get your mail, like go outside the house, go walk to your mailbox, grab your mail, come back home. Those are things that we would consider behavioral activation. And then can we move it more towards some of these pleasurable things that you like? Go read a book, go on a walk, go call a friend. Then we might transition to that kind of stuff. And the reason we do that is to interrupt points in the triangle that are reinforcing our depression. So that's what this side on the right is with the green arrows. The other thing I'll add too is this bullet point here that oftentimes someone with depression might impose negative punishment upon themselves anyway. So already the cycle is reinforcing the cycle of depression. And when we feel so low about ourselves, people have self-hatred towards themselves, which I've seen a lot. Sometimes it feels like they deserve it. Like, well, I'm depressed. I'm a bad person. So yeah, I should feel like this. I'm like, it's just what it is. I should feel like this. That's something that we also want to try to work around as well, because, I think we might say externalize it to someone else. Like if, let's say they have a little sister, would you say your little sister deserves that? Probably not. Things like that are stuff we have to work with as well. So that might be working against us. It's like on top of this cycle of reinforcement, someone might also be imposing punishment on themselves. Yeah, and then we talked about cognitive restructuring. We also talked about behavioral activation, which is intended to increase positive reinforcement. So if we do the things we like, we do things that make us feel good, even if it is just getting out of bed to go brush your teeth, that's going to feel better. And so we want to increase that. We want to increase the frequency of the behavior. And with that is probably going to have some increase in emotions. Maybe some thoughts about ourselves are going to change, like, I actually can get out of bed. I'm not such a slob the way I thought, right? So some of those things are also going to improve with this behavioral activation. Okay. I'm going to skip this one because this is just more about the cognitive triangle. I have these on Canvas, but you guys can watch them yourselves. And this one, actually, okay. I'm going to show you what I would normally use as a worksheet, and then we can come back to this video because I think it's helpful to think about developmentally what's an appropriate way to talk to a kid about cognitive restructuring, cognitive distortions. With kids, I haven't really had to do behavioral activation. I find myself doing that more with teens and adults. So with the kids I worked with, at least, the severity of depression was like quite low, and it was more like early signs of depression, which was better and easier to work with. And so we spend mostly a lot of time with thinking traps and relaxation strategies versus in my work with older people with more severe depression, it's been a lot of behavioral activation plus these things. So I want to talk about how we would talk about it with little kids. But just some examples of things we might do. So some of these things come from like, there's different websites for free. There's a therapist aid, like psychology tools, something like that. There are free worksheets out there. Doesn't really matter if you want a worksheet or not. I think with kids, it's helpful to have like materials. So I've worked with depression, primarily like 7, 8-year-olds. They turned 9 by the time I stopped working with them. So between like 7 to 9. And one of the first things we'll start with is the triangle, and I dilute it a lot. So what we just talked about with your feelings impact how you you think about things, how you do things. Like I dilute it a lot, but basically we talk about this triangle. So by the time I've ended therapy with these little kids, they know what the triangle is. They talk about the triangle. They tell what their parents what it is. So you're still doing psychoed about this triangle. And then I use that as like a way to show like, okay, so the stuff we're working on together, like this is for this part of the triangle. This is for this part of the triangle. So, but for me, I have found with at least the two kids, the two that I have in my mind right now, we started a lot with like the emotional, like relaxation side first, and then we kind of moved into the cognitions. So we first started with, can you name your emotion? Like, do you know what you're feeling? And sometimes they don't know, which makes a lot of sense. It's good, bad, happy, sad, which is pretty good to say most of that. For older kids, we might have some more nuance. So I often have like a printed like emotion chart if they find it helpful. I had one kid who I used to work with, who like would say, she was like she was young and she would say like I don't have emotions and was like pretty serious about it, and I would show her this chart, wouldn't get anything out of her, just would she would not say what she was feeling. um and anyway, so I think what I did for her is I made like a customized emotion chart for her. She really liked like the Hello Kitty and Friends like characters, so things like Cinnamoroll and I think it's like Karomi, all these things. So I like handmade an emotion chart for her. And of course, once I did that, this Karomi looked mad, this Cinnamoroll looked happy. Then she was able to start naming her emotions, and that was just where we needed to start. Whereas another kid I had worked with, like this was just fun to have the chart, but she was very attuned with like what she was feeling. She could say, I'm really sad today, or I'm really mad. This just happened in the car. So depending on the kid, I think an emotion chart can be helpful. And then the other thing we would do is, okay, now that we have our emotions, it's really helpful to know how much of it we feel. Sometimes we feel good, or sometimes we feel bad, but sometimes we feel really, really bad. And it's helpful to know like that where we lie on this thermometer so that we know when it's time to use our breathing techniques, or we can go talk to a friend, like all these tools that we're going to use to help interrupt that emotionality. So with little kids, I've done thumbs up, thumbs down, like as a way to kind of gauge how we're feeling. Like, well, not just thumbs up, it's like here, here, here. So a good, okay, not so good. So finding a way to quantify where we're at rather than just saying the emotion. For older kids, and for most of my kids, we've done a thermometer. So this rating scale down here. So like how strong were my body cues. So for this thermometer in particular, we did emotions. And then we would say, like, where is the emotion in your body? And they would like color in like when I have anxiety, well, they wouldn't say anxiety, but when I'm nervous, I have butterflies in my stomach. So we draw little butterflies in the stomach. And so if we're using anxiety as an example, so nervousness, okay, you have butterflies, my chest is pounding, like my heart feels really fast. Okay, so then where on your thermometer did you feel it? And they might say like, oh, it was like really, really bad. Like I wanted to throw up. I wanted to run out of the room. I was at a 10. And then we would say, okay, so you were at a 10. Ooh, that seems like a good time to use our deep breathing or belly breathing or whatever. So helping to quantify where they're at. It could be anger, whatever the emotion is, could be really, really profound sadness, but just helping to quantify where we're at. That way they kind of identify, like they have the awareness of when they're ready to use a skill. And it's something that can be used um, conversationally. So, if I go back out of the session after finishing this with the kid, introducing it, we've operationalized where they're at on their thermometer. That then gives child and parent a language now. Okay, so when I don't, blah 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 kid says they're at 5, that feels pretty good. That's like a neutral feeling. Oh, but they just went up to 7. Mom, what can you do to help? Or, can you check in with her and ask, oh, are you at a 7? So just giving language might be sometimes more helpful than just saying she's sad. She can just go like in her room or something. So it just helps facilitate more conversation openly about the emotion and where they're at in terms of intensity. Again, these are like worksheets. This one is from Therapist Aid on the left, and then the one on the right comes from an adult book, which was recommended in my program just because of how like seminal of it. It's just like a good CBT book for therapists. So this is talking more about the cognitive triangle, and these are our attempts at like restructuring now. So once we know how we feel, once we know how to improve our emotions or to help cool them down, we know how to quantify, we know what the triangle is. Now we're going to move to the thought side. So what we're thinking. And it's exactly what we did with the explanatory style. We just used situations that they bring in. So for homework, I might say, like, practice this with your mom or your dad, whoever's at home with you, and let's come back and talk about it. And usually in the week, if they're at school, like something would have happened that we can plug into this little formula and see if there are any thoughts that are potentially distortions happening, and then kind of work on them from there. So I like this one. I've used this one before. It was pre-filled in. So what happened? My friend Emma hasn't spoken to me as much as usual over the past week. Okay, and so what's happening for you? I'm thinking Emma hasn't talked to me much this week. She has to be mad at me. She must be mad at me. Okay, now I'm feeling really sad and hurt. And, because I was upset, I ignored her and I avoided her at school. I just didn't want to see her. And so something we might say is, okay, so let's keep all of this in our mind. Something to think about is and this is true for CBT, just because we think something doesn't mean it's true. Just because we perceive something does not mean it's true either. So a lot of times, like, and they might rate over here, I feel sad and hurt. They might say, like, yeah, I was 8 out of 10 at school today. Like, it was really bad. That's why I ignored her. I walked away. I like tried to avoid her. But then it felt worse because it just made me think that she definitely doesn't like me because I didn't see her at all. Those kinds of things might increase our anxiety or depression over the day. And so we might say, okay, can we try to replace the thought? Like, is there different, like, I don't know, is there something else that could be true? And you might say, well, yeah, Emma might be upset with me, but maybe not. I don't know. So kind of this balanced thought of like, I can't act with certainty because I don't actually have evidence, but it might be true. So maybe, okay, if you're now more 50-50, your feelings about this might be, I'm a little bit worried still that Emma might be upset with me, but I'm not actually as sad because I'm not so certain anymore. And then the new action, you might, instead of avoiding her, you might just ask her, are you okay? Are you mad at me? So that's one alternative. Another alternative could be, okay, let's generate a new thought. She's probably just been really busy at school or something else with something else. Okay, so now that I have that thought, free feeling wise, I might still be disappointed because I haven't really seen her much, but I think I understand. That kind of really brings down the intensity as well. And then in terms of what you might do differently, okay, maybe I'll just still stay friends with her, and say hi just to be sure. And the last one, maybe she is upset about something, but it might not be related to me. That could be true. And then you might still be worried about how she's feeling, and your action might just be to ask what's going on or if she needs help. So these are not meant to like invalidate the person's feelings or what they're thinking. This is really just intended to help like think about if you think of and I've done this like a piece of a pie, right? The pie, the big circle is your pie of probability. How likely is it on this pie that you did something that she hates you and she doesn't want to be friends with you? A lot of times, for certain situations, we realize like, oh, actually it's possible. Like it is a sliver on the pie, but it actually may not account for most things. There's actually like 10 other possible alternatives, and that just takes the heat off. We kind of put our brakes on. We are not really as certain anymore, and that makes things feel a lot less intense. And then we're able to think, implement skills, things like that. So that's something we've done with kids. This is a kid worksheet. And then you don't have to, but sometimes people feel it's helpful to actually label what the distortion is. So is it the overgeneralization? Is it all or nothing thinking? And a lot of times the therapist will point out, like, it sounds like if they're using CBT, it sounds like, you're making a should statement. How do you know you should be doing something? The jumping to conclusions, so mind reading. So when someone says, like, yeah, I just know she did that on purpose. I mean, do you know? I don't know. How can we actually say? So things like that, people might point it out. The other thing we work on a lot is this all or nothing, like black or white thinking. Like it's either this or it's that. I either get 100% or I fail. So kind of just trying to restore balance, is something we might do with these distortions. I was gonna go back and look at the mental filter thing. If you go back here, I just think it's a cute video. I would watch at least one of them so you can hear how someone might talk about it. I've also played some of these videos before in a therapy session if it's short enough, so you might just want to go back and look. Okay, so that's the CBT stuff. And then IPT is what we're gonna end. I thought we were gonna get to suicide today, but let's end here. That way, when we pick up, we'll do IPT. We can skip the case examples unless you guys want to look at it, and then we'll do suicide and bipolar. And I think the bipolar will go pretty quickly. So we can end here. We'll cover IPT and the rest of it on Friday. Oops. Any questions before we go? Okay. All right. I'll see you guys on Friday.